We're on the last new content video of the year. Woohoo, we made it, yay. And if you have a true scary story you want to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And subscribe if you're not subscribed, please. Oh, and thank you. A couple years back, my buddies and I made plans to welcome in the new year with a road trip to a cabin in the woods. We had a pretty rough plan laid out. We were bringing plenty of food, and drinks, and music, and we would do whatever we felt like doing once we were out there. We didn't have any other specific plans, like going skiing or anything nearby, but rather we all agreed that we would go if we were all feeling up to it. Sometimes you can make all these plans and reservations, and things can suddenly change once you get to your reservation, so we preferred to keep those things open. My girlfriend thought that it sounded weird to not have plans, but we actually preferred it this way. In fact, we were happy to just be in the cabin all day, eating and drinking and playing a game. And yes, we did bring a game console or two. We made our way to the cabin, there were 4 of us, and we all met up and rode together in my SUV. We left on the evening of December 30th, which was later than we wanted, but Parker got tied up helping his girl with something, so we were running a bit behind. No big deal though. The cabin was only a few hours away, and we would definitely be able to keep each other awake. We pulled up around 8 or 9 that night, so it was already dark. Parker, Miguel, and I started bringing our stuff to the door, following Anthony, as he's the one that booked the cabin and had the key to it, when we noticed him panicking. We asked him what was wrong, and he said that he couldn't find the key. So, with just our phone lights, we helped him look all over the ground, his bag, and even my car in case we dropped it somewhere and we never found it. We hardly had a signal where we were, but he tried calling his wife to see if the key was at home, and the call wouldn't connect. It was late and dark, and none of us really wanted to go back to get the key, but we also didn't want to call the trip a bust. So, we did the next best thing. We tried to break into the cabin. The cabin had a normal lock, as well as a deadbolt, so he was trying to pick it. Parker walked around to check all the windows, and I held a light for Miguel. Anthony stayed near my car trying to get a signal to call someone, possibly his wife, or possibly the person he'd rented the cabin from. For a moment there, I was pretty annoyed. It was below freezing that night, so sleeping in my SUV wasn't even going to be an option. I don't think Miguel even really knew how to pick locks, but he was doing his best. My annoyance quickly faded and turned to this paranoia as I started feeling like we were being watched. I began scanning the area around the trees, and that's when I saw it. Back between the trees, there was a shadow of a figure. It looked really large, like a person was just standing back there and watching us. Their shoulders were very broad and they just looked wide, or big even. I'm still not really sure how to explain it. As I stared at this thing, I couldn't help but feel vulnerable, like prey in the night. This thing definitely watched over this place or called it their home. It just had that aura to it. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I pressured Miguel to do something quickly. He said that he was having troubles and suggested that we should try a window too. I pointed out the shadow to Miguel, asking if he saw it, and he confirmed that he did, but he said that he thought it was just shadows from the trees playing tricks on us. I didn't see that. I understand what pareidolia is, but this was not that. The slow movement was not in sync with the swaying trees, and it could not be from them. Finally, Parker returned saying that the back door lock was pretty weak, and suggested that we try it. We all went around back, demanding that Anthony come with us, not wanting to leave him alone and to make him be a victim of a cheesy horror movie setup. Once around back, the shadow was out of view, so I started to ease up a bit. From there, we noticed that it was just an old-fashioned doorknob. So Miguel pulled out a credit card and was finally able to get us in. I was relieved when we were finally in the cabin. We unlocked the front door, grabbed our bags, and I looked around one last time, but I didn't see the shadow anywhere. So, for a moment, and just a moment, I questioned myself, thinking maybe I was just seeing things. And I let it go to enjoy the night. We settled into the cabin that night. We ate some quick food and just chilled out in the living room. We even slept great that night. Miguel and I took the rooms, Parker took the couch, and as punishment for forgetting the key, we made Anthony sleep on the pull-out cot. There were no hard feelings, though. We all gave him a hard time about it, but only in fun. So, New Year's Eve arrived and our day was great. And we left to pick up some more food items to last us through the next day, but otherwise we actually stayed at the cabin. And there was a fire pit out back, so we sat there for a few hours until it started snowing again. We went in and played games for a while, until midnight struck. We had another round of drinks, and we started settling down, probably around 2 in the morning. By then, we were all in bed. I'd been hard out, as that normally happens to me when I drink, but out of nowhere, I was jolted awake for no apparent reason. It was like one of those falling dreams that wakes you up. I laid in the bed just staring at the window, and that feeling came back from the night that we'd arrived. I was feeling watched, and was starting to get this really unsettling feeling. Something told me to check the windows, so, of course, I did. I approached the window that I had been staring at. It was blocked by thick red curtains, and as I quickly opened the curtains, I was met face to face with another large dark shadow. But this time, I could tell that it had eyes. There were glowing yellow eyes staring right at me. I jumped backwards, shouted some expletives, and then rushed out of the room. Anthony and Parker heard me and were already sitting up asking what was going on. I explained to them what I saw, and they both went to my room to check it out. By the time we'd gone back to my room, the shadow was gone, and I explained to them what I saw the night that we arrived. They both seemed interested in this, and suggested that we all go take a look. So, we put our shoes on and went out for a walk. We walked out front and looked around, when I saw that same large shadow seemingly walking away from the cabin. It was close to the trees at this point, and I pointed it out to the others, who quickly saw it too. Parker shouted out to the figure, but it didn't stop. He shouted again, and that was when Miguel shouted at us from the doorway, asking what we were doing. They pointed out the shadow figure, and Miguel's tone changed. He walked out with us, and we all watched this thing make its way back into the trees. We were in awe this time. We didn't know what we were witnessing. It was clearly walking on 2 legs, and it had the shape of a person, but literally all we could see was black. Once it was in the trees, Parker shouted out to no one in particular, "What the hell is that thing?" I guess that triggered something because those glowing eyes opened up, and we could all clearly see them. I turned to Miguel to explain to him what I'd seen from my bedroom window when I saw the same yellow eyes. But this was from a different figure. I pointed them out to everyone, and they all looked at it. Then we all looked around and saw multiple sets of eyes. There were at least 6 that I can remember, but even though it didn't seem like that many telling this story, it was terrifying being out there. Just the 4 of us in the dark, surrounded by trees, and whatever these towering things were. We all seemed to have the same ideas, and we ran back into the cabin. We checked to make sure all the doors and windows were locked and all the curtains were closed, wanting to make sure those things couldn't watch us from outside. I was worried about them possibly trying to get in, since the one wasn't afraid to approach the window. We all tried to loosen up and forget about it, but it was difficult. Every tap, every creak, and even when I saw the curtains move most likely from the vent above it, it messed with my head. Come morning, everything was normal, as it had been the day prior. We looked outside and saw no figures in the trees. There weren't even footprints around the cabin, which made no sense. We all agreed that what we saw was simply something that we couldn't explain, and we packed up our stuff, pretending like we'd had a great time, and that we hadn't had anything weird happen to us at all. I told my girlfriend about it when I got home, and she seemed skeptical, but everything I saw happened. It had to be real, because I wasn't the only one to see it, but I don't know what it was. I don't think I want to go back to see if I could find them again either. Part of me thinks that night may have been a warning, and it's a warning that I'm always going to remember. A few years ago, I had moved to a new place after the apartment that I lived in unexpectedly hiked up the rent. I was planning on renewing as I was comfortable with everything, so I obviously hadn't been looking at other places. When they sprung that on me, I knew that I couldn't afford it and had 60 days to find a new place. Thankfully, I did find a small house for rent that was actually about $100 less than what I was paying, and I grabbed it immediately. The only issue was that it wasn't in the best location. It was a pretty run-down town, but the neighborhood at least seemed to be pretty tight-knit. And while driving down the road to check the place out, I saw signs for neighborhood watch, and several people had cameras by their front doors and garage. I figured that they at least probably took their safety and security seriously, so I would be okay. I had actually been there for about 8 months or so with no issues, and after meeting some of the neighbors, I was feeling better about it, and was actually getting pretty comfortable with it. I also had my dog that I had taken with me when I moved out of my parents' place. I named him Boots, because he has dark brown to black fur, but all of his feet are white. It looks like he's wearing boots. I'm pretty sure that he's a mix, but I can tell that he's at least part Rottweiler. While he really is just a big teddy bear, he can definitely look intimidating. So, he also made me feel safer. So, this event happened while I was living there, obviously. It had been raining off and on for a few days when the temp dropped enough for it to start snowing. It was New Year's Eve, and Boots and I went to my parents' place for a Christmas and New Year's celebration. Once we got home that night, I had barely put away my leftovers when we crashed on the couch together, just watching some random movie on Netflix. I didn't have to work the next day, so a night on the couch, sleeping in with my dog beside me, sounded like a pretty good night. I had been asleep for a few hours, but I remember hearing a weird scraping sound. It was like metal on wood, but I couldn't be bothered to open my eyes to check it. I think part of me assumed either it was in my head, like a dream, or maybe my dog was doing something. However, when the sound persisted, it seemed to click in my mind that maybe it was Boots scratching at the door. So I woke up. However, I was surprised when not only did I not see him at the door, but he was laying at the other end of the couch, looking at the door with his head tilted. I laid there staring at him, trying to process what was happening. but when I heard the sound again, I jumped and turned my attention to the door. I now recognized the sound as someone trying to either mess with my doorknob or the deadbolt. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I am not a fighter. I ran track in high school, but that was about it. I'm tall, but I'm also pretty skinny with no real muscle. My dog was definitely more intimidating than I had ever been. So, to say that I was pretty freaked out was an understatement. I honestly didn't know what to do. I stood up and stared at the door, and Boots, sensing my fear, jumped off the couch and started growling. As I mentioned, he was always a very gentle giant, so to see him growling and his fur sticking up made me feel even worse about this situation. He knew whoever was beyond that door had no good intentions. I didn't know if I should try to scare them off. Should I hide and try to call for help? I decided that it would be better to let myself be known. Maybe they were trying to break in and rob the place, but maybe they would take off if they knew that it wasn't empty. I mustered up in the most threatening tone that I could, "What the hell are you doing?" "Can I come in?" I heard him respond in a creepy tone. Boots was now starting these little barks between his growls. Normally, I probably would have asked him if he was okay or needed help, but the way he responded made me think that this guy had ill intent. So I responded by telling him that he needed to leave before I called the cops. I didn't hear anything, and I was too nervous to open my blinds to see if he was still there, and so I grabbed my phone to check the doorbell camera. It was a knockoff one, so I at least had some kind of visual. But before I could even pull up the camera, I started hearing the scratching sound again. So I kicked at my door saying, "Hey, stop!" which made the scratching sound stop. I again didn't hear anything, so I continued to open the app, and I saw the tail end of the guy walking away from my door, almost with a skip in his step. I can't explain it, but it made the whole situation just that much more eerie. I waited until I could no longer see him on the camera before I opened the door to check it out. There, on the porch, resting on my welcome mat, was a flathead screwdriver and what I think was part of a metal hanger. Trying to figure out what the metal sound was, I looked at my doorknob and the deadbolt and saw scratch marks all over both of them. This guy was obviously trying to use those items to get in. That had me pretty scared. What would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night? What would he have done if he did get in and just saw me laying there? I grabbed the items with my sleeve and, without touching them as much as possible, in case they could be used for prints, and then called the cops immediately. When they arrived, they took down a report. They took the items and said that they would circle the area to see if they could find the guy. One of them came back and reported that they didn't find him, and that was basically the end of it. I was still a bit on edge, but the tiredness was once again winning, so I went around and made sure that all of my doors and windows were locked. Then, Boots and I went to my bedroom, locking that door as well. My room faced the driveway, so I thought, if anything, I could still see or probably hear if someone came back. Surprisingly, I fell asleep pretty quickly. It was around 4 when I woke up again. This time it was a bit more abrupt. Boots was growling and doing his little barks again. I woke up and looked up at him to see him staring at my door. But this was the door to my bedroom, not the front door. Was someone in my house at this point? I called out, "Hello?" But I didn't get a response and I didn't hear anything, so I got up and went to my door. As I approached the door, so did Boots, but he was now barking very loudly, something that I rarely saw him do. I slowly unlocked the door and quickly swung it open. Thankfully, there was no one there, but Boots took off out of the room and then ran to the back door. I followed him, looking around, and I didn't see anything out of place. I was really nervous about the whole situation, but the way that Boots was barking and scratching at the back door, something told me that I should let him out. I opened the heavy wooden door and again saw nothing but a blanket of snow. So I opened the screen door, and Boots flew out, barking and growling. I quickly grabbed the closest shoes that I had and dashed out after my dog, worried for his safety. I followed his tracks to the side of the house, but not before noticing the prints in the snow. They were human, and they were definitely leading to my back door. Now I was following both the footprints and my dog's tracks. When I met back up with Boots, he was still barking and snarling. I had never seen him like that before, which really kind of startled me. Something had to be very wrong in order to get this much anger out of him. I looked all around, even directly where he was looking, but I couldn't see anyone or anything. I finally got him calmed down enough and got him to come back inside with me. I could tell that he was still on edge. His fur was still standing, his ears were straight up like he was constantly listening, and he was looking all over the place. He wouldn't even sit down. I can't say that I could blame him, though. I was pretty well awake and on high alert at that point, too. He definitely kept me awake, but seeing the footprints, yeah, it kind of scared me as well. They looked fresh. It was still snowing, but they weren't covered. Was this why Boots had started barking? Did he hear something? I didn't think the police could do anything about the prints, so I didn't bother to call them back. I stayed awake the rest of that night, completely unable to sleep. But thankfully, there were no other events either. I emailed the owner that morning to let them know what happened, in case any part of the door had been damaged. I didn't want to be charged for it, even though they didn't really seem like the type to do that. I was still a bit freaked out about the previous night, but I was feeling a lot safer during the day. It wasn't until a few nights later, when the snow had pretty much melted, that I found more evidence of something. I took Boots out back after he'd been scratching at the door, and I just walked him around the small yard. At one point, he approached the fence line that he stood barking at the night prior, and started scratching at the ground. I approached to see what he may have found, and instead of a bug or something silly like that, there was something shiny on the ground. I picked it up, and realized that it was a pocket knife. To me, this cemented in my mind that not only did someone try to get in the front door, but those footprints around back, and now the knife, told me that someone was definitely in my backyard too. Was this the same guy? And why did he try so hard to get into my place? I had no way of tying the knife to that night, but I just had this huge feeling that it had to be related. The fence was just your normal chain link fence, so he could have jumped it, causing him to lose the knife, which is why I saw the footprints, and why Boots ran to that side of the house. After all this, and having a quick chat with the owner of the house, he agreed to let me set up some additional cameras around the place, and we installed an easy alarm system on both doors. It was pretty cheap, and it was easy to do, as they basically just go off when the doors are opened without me putting in the pin. It made me feel a lot better about living there, but I also feel like I got a taste of some of the dangers of the city that I live in. I still live in the same house, and thankfully I have not had any other incidents like this. But that doesn't mean that I have let up on any of my security measures. But that was still one of the scariest nights for me, and I hope that Boots never has to be a protector like that again. I want to preface this story by saying that it is several events that happened in one night, and one of them does involve an attempted essay. I ask that you let your listeners know about this, just in case they don't want to hear about it. I also want to say that with everything that happened, and all of it being in one night, some people may not believe the story, but that's on them. This is all true, and it happened to myself and my friends on a night that was supposed to be fun. Anyways, on to the story. Back in my early to mid-20s, I was pretty reckless, and I will be the first to admit it. I had just finished my master's degree and was pretty nose down into it, trying to do my best. Because my life revolved around my school, I rarely did anything outside of school and work. So when I finished it, and already had a promising job offer, I was ready to let loose. It started with my friends and I just hitting up their favorite clubs or going to mutual friends' places for parties. So for New Year's, it wasn't going to be any different. In fact, we were expecting to get pretty wild that night. We planned on stopping at a nearby bar, and from there we were planning on hopping to different ones, and checking out any house party that we heard about or were invited to. Basically, wherever the entertainment went, we would follow. We started as a larger group. It was myself, as well as my friends Elena, Melissa, Diamond, and Serenity. And we all met up at the bar Melissa actually worked at. Melissa was working that night, so we partied there until she got off around 8. Once she changed and we all had a round of shots, we left to go to one of our favorite clubs. When we arrived, we had a few more drinks. Elena didn't. She was our DD. After about an hour, though, the fun started to die down as someone in the club became a pretty annoying drunk and tried to start a fight with people. Wanting to move on, Melissa said that she'd been invited to a party by one of her customers, so she suggested that we go check it out. And that's where we went next. The party was just the type of energy that we were looking for. There were tons of people everywhere. In the yard, the living room, the kitchen, and the music could be heard throughout the house, too. People were dancing, drinking, laughing, and just overall having a great time. Melissa introduced us to the guy that invited us over, and it was pretty obvious that they both had eyes for each other. She began talking and flirting with him, so the rest of us walked around to get drinks and enjoy our time too. At some point, I needed to use the restroom, so I thought to go and look for it myself. I walked down a hallway that had 3 doors, all of which were closed. None of them looked different or had any indication if one of them were a bathroom or a bedroom. So all I could do was knock on the door and wait for a response. I knocked on the first door and got no answer, so I tried to open it, but it was locked. I went to the next door to try it, and after knocking and getting no response, I tried the door again. This time, it opened, but part of me wished that it hadn't. When I opened it, all I saw was a mattress on the floor and a woman sitting on the edge of it, with blood all over her arms and legs. I froze in place, not knowing what to do. Who was this woman and why was she in that room? And more importantly, why was she covered in blood? To add to the creepiness, I couldn't even really tell if she was in pain or anything, because she was singing. I can't recall what the song was, but it was some kind of nursery rhyme. I was already buzzed and not thinking straight, I'm sure, so I just closed the door and ran back to the living room. I tried to find Melissa since she knew the guy hosting the party, and thankfully she hadn't gone far. I told her and her friend what I saw, and he just said, "Oh, that's Mary. She thinks there are worms in her skin." Like, it was just a completely normal thing. There was a lot of blood, and it really freaked me out. It definitely was not the vibe that I wanted that night, so I was ready to leave. I went up to Elena and asked her about leaving, and she agreed. We started gathering everyone up, but Melissa said that she was wanting to stay. No surprise to the rest of us, though, so we said goodbye and the four of us headed to another bar to check out. I was pretty familiar with this bar, so once we arrived, the atmosphere immediately drew me in and we were all drinking and dancing. There were even two guys that came over and bought us some drinks. They were both attractive, and I would be lying if I said that I didn't like the attention that I was getting. I was single and had been for about a year, so it was nice. After some time, maybe about an hour or so, the guys that had been with us invited us back to their place for the countdown. It was probably around 11:30 or so, and really liking the guys, Diamond and I were wanting to go too. Unfortunately, Elena had started drinking, so she couldn't drive anymore, and Serenity did have a guy at home who was also watching their kid, giving her this night out. So, of course, she wasn't interested in hanging out with a bunch of random guys. Made sense to us, so we all agreed that Elena and Serenity would stay where they were and get a ride home later, and that Diamond and I would go with the guys, possibly meeting up later that night. So the four of us hopped into one of the guys' cars and headed back to their place. Again, I know we were being stupid for this, and we all understand that now. But being under the influence, we were not making the best decisions. However, once we arrived and went in, we started sobering up again. Maybe there wasn't going to be a full-blown party there, but what we didn't expect was the house to look the way it did. It was disgusting. There was trash all over the floor, from wrappers to actual to-go food containers. Dirty dishes and clothes everywhere, and it smelled awful. I looked over at Diamond and I knew that she was feeling the same way. The guy that had been dancing with me, we'll call him Brett, turned on an old stereo nearby. And the other guy, Zach, was moving the trash off of the dirty old couch, saying that we could have a seat. Neither of us wanted to sit down on that couch, nor even touch anything for that matter. So we hesitantly made our way into the room and away from the front door. We both stood there swaying a bit to the music. We wanted to have fun, but we were not feeling it anymore, and I was definitely on edge. But as the time passed, the guys' intentions became crystal clear. They would sit on the couch and pull us over to them, making certain suggestions. We would go from declining their advances to even trying to avoid their grabs at our hips, but it seemed to only make them angry. That is when they became more aggressive, and insisted that we give them what they wanted. But this was not what I wanted, nor was it what I was here for. Granted, I can't speak for Diamond, but judging by the look on her face, the feeling was mutual. I still tried to politely decline, and Diamond was a bit more aggressive, saying that she was not interested, and then said that if they didn't stop, that we were just going to leave. This apparently did not sit well with them, and they tried to grab us, which caused us both to fight back. After a bit of a struggle, Brett tried to wrap his arm around my neck, so I bit him. He let go, which caused Zach to be distracted, so Diamond was able to get away from him too. I grabbed her by the arm and we both ran out of the house. We kept walking down the street, becoming paranoid every time we saw a car, but no one ever stopped. We ended up coming across a gas station and we went inside thinking that we were safe being around others and in the view of cameras. From there, I used my phone to get an Uber, thinking that we could go back to Elena and Serenity, and probably call it a night after that. This night was not going as planned, and we even missed the countdown because of the whole ordeal. Once the Uber arrived, we both got in and the guy driving had to be close to our age. He looked pretty young, but was very friendly. He asked us how our night had been, and we briefly explained the hell that we'd experienced. He laughed with us and expressed how crazy it sounded, and at that moment, I felt like we could breathe again. At one point, our driver started slowing down as he reached a red light, but it switched back to green, so he started to speed back up again. And then we saw a car flying at us on the right, and the last thing I remember was screaming. I woke up to Diamond leaning on me unconscious, and then I could hear a man's voice shouting for us. It was our driver. I finally realized where I was. I was in the car that was now on its side, and the driver was trying to wake us up and pull us out. And shortly after, I heard sirens and other people talking. Several people helped pull me out, and finally, after we pulled Diamond out, she woke up. I was so afraid that she was dead as she was unresponsive. Thankfully, all three of us did survive with minor injuries. I had a concussion, Diamond had a broken rib or two, and our Uber driver, Kyle, I do remember his name, was practically unscathed, other than some cuts and bruises. He checked in on both of us in the hospital, and apologized that it happened, but neither of us blamed him. It was far from his fault. In fact, we apologized because he was in the situation, because he'd picked us up. The driver of the other car was drunk and obviously ran a red light, so they got charged pretty heavily. The night ended there for us, for obvious reasons. But the rest of our friends all turned out okay, and met us at the hospital too. I had my fill of crazy partying that night, and I told myself that I would never do that again. And so far, I've stuck to that. I may still go out, but I stick with my friends. And I don't hop around, nor do I go home with strange men. This was literally the most eventful and probably worst night of my life. And it's safe to say that everything that happened that night was very sobering, and I will never forget it. So that, my friends, was a collection of some New Year's Eve, whatever you want to call it, scary stories. Scary stories that happen as the calendar turns to the next calendar. I was going to say page, but that happens once a month. Unless you're like me and have one of these fun little tear it off calendars where you just tear it off and it's always a new page, which doesn't really help my statement at all. Yep, had to tear off two because it was still said Wednesday, and it's Friday when I'm recording this. So, yeah, really bad about that. I like the idea of the tearaway calendar, and then it just sits there on December 4th until December 23rd, because I look at it every day, and I'm terrible at following through on things like that. I don't know. I don't know what I'm terrible at anymore. I'm just terrible. That's all we're going to say. If you enjoyed the stories, this video, however you want to put it, please do consider subscribing to the channel, as that does help tremendously. We hit a pretty good number this year, 26,000 at the end of the year. It's pretty damn good if you ask me. Would love to have more people join the Nevermore, join my community. And yeah. If you liked the video, I already said that, consider hitting the thumbs up button. That is the first thing I usually mention, but I forgot about it a second ago. So do that. And if you really like the video, you can go down below the video and leave me a fun comment about anything you want to leave me a comment about. It can be anything. Literally anything. Yeah. There's also Patreon and memberships for early access to content like this, so long as it goes up early. And you can also do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Also, I guess I'll mention again, on my community tab, there is a postcard exchange thing going on there. I gave y'all a P.O. box number. If you send a postcard or small letter or anything that is not of monetary value to the P.O. box and I get it, I will send a postcard back. It is intended to be for best wishes for 2024. We are doing this to, I guess, quote-unquote, manifest a good year. If nothing else, it strengthens the sense of community, and I get to get postcards from all you lovely people all around the planet. Yeah. That's all I got to say. This is the last new video of the year. There's one more video tomorrow, but it's just a sleep video, so it's a kind of a compilation. Yeah, nothing new coming out until the 1st, which is a glitch video. So that's only like, you know, a day, or it's only like 2 days away, so it's I'm saying that like it's a far away thing, but it's literally in 2 days. So anyways, friends, hope you all have a beautiful weekend. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until I see you again, my friends, much love, Happy New Year, and sleep well.